Hi, welcome to this ASMR. Let's talk about Lady Dimitrescu, or the Japanese urban legend that we all know about Hachishakusama, the 8 feet tall woman. People are wondering if they are the same or based on each other. I'll leave it to you. Let me tell you about this Japanese urban legend. Story goes about a person who is telling what happened when he or she was small. Let's just assume it's about a girl. She's talking about the grandparents that were living in Japan. And every summer, her parents would take there on holiday just to visit them. They were living in a small village with a big backyard. And you can imagine a girl in another city having a lot of room to play. That was just fabulous. And it's also what she says. She loved to play there during the summer. So when they arrived, the grandparents would welcome her with open arms, as she was their only grandchild. And like all grandparents do, they would spoil her rotten. Last time that she saw them was the summer when she was 8 years old. That probably was quite a long time ago. As always, her parents would book a flight to Japan, and they would drive from the airport to her grandparents' house. It was a long drive, monotonous roads. She would look out the window and sometimes even just count the lights that would pass by, or just dream about the time to come when she would be with her grandparents. And when they would arrive at the grandparents' place, she would see them waiting for her with lots of little presents to give her. It was something she really looked forward to every time that they would go there. Her parents, they wanted to have some alone time, so after a few days, they would take a trip to another part of Japan, leaving her in the care of her grandparents. As you can imagine, she did not miss her parents at all. She had the time of her life. And one day she was playing in the backyard. Grandparents, they were inside the house doing their chores. It was a hot summer's day, and she was laying down in the grass to rest. She would stare up at the clouds and watch them pass over. Try to guess what figure the shapes would be, and she would enjoy the feeling of the soft rays of the sun and the gentle breeze every now and again that would give her some coolness. And as she was about to get up, she heard a strange sound. Po, 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 po. She didn't know what it was. It was also hard to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like somebody was making the noise themselves, as if they were just saying po, 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 over and over again in a deep, masculine voice. She thought it was strange. It didn't make sense. Why that sound? Was it even a person? So she started looking around, searching the surroundings for the source of the noise. She was looking behind the bushes. It was a small shed. She was looking if something maybe was loose that was making that noise. Maybe something that was hanging in a tree that made that noise because it was clapping against a branch or something like that. Or the logical things, you know. But then she noticed something on top of one of the small hedges that enclosed the backyard. A straw hat. She did not really think much of it, but as she looked closer, she noticed it wasn't resting on the hedge. It was actually behind it. And that's also where the sound was coming from. Bo, 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 bo. And then the hat began to move, like someone was wearing it. That was odd. And the hat stopped at a small gap in the hedge. And she looked closer, and she could see a face peering through. A woman. It was a very pale face, but she didn't think much of it because it was normal there that people were pale. But this woman, she was pale as snow or white porcelain. You couldn't tell if she was smiling. Her mouth was just a very small red stripe that didn't laugh, didn't cry, emotionless. It was also strange you could see her face, because the hedges, they were high, almost 8 feet tall. That surprised her. How tall is that woman? She was wondering if she was wearing stilts or some sort of high-heeled shoes. Although high-heeled shoes, it was logical to think, but a second later, she didn't believe it was probably stilts or something. She was thinking, she saw that in the circus at the time. A split second later, the woman walked off, and the strange noise disappeared with her, fading into the distance. Bewildered, the girl got up and wandered back into the house. Her grandparents were in the kitchen, drinking tea. She was looking at them, an old couple, holding the tea in their hands, gently sipping it, just like a picture. Really, it was engraved in her memory forever. She sat down at the table, and after a while she told her parents what she had seen. They weren't really paying attention to her until she mentioned the distinctive sound. Bo, 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 bo. She couldn't exactly replicate it, but both of them suddenly froze. Her grandma's eyes, they grew wide. She covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa's face became very serious, and he reached out to her and grabbed her by the arm. "Listen," he said, "this is very important," in an intense voice. He really sounded serious. You must tell us exactly how tall was she? I don't know. As tall as the garden hedge, She replied. Yeah, the tone of his voice started to scare her. Just as tall as the garden hedge, really? Nothing more? Then her grandfather bombarded her with questions. Where was she standing? Do you know where? Can you show it? When did this happen? What time? What were you doing? Did she see you? Did you look at her? Well, she tried to answer all the questions as best as she could. Then he suddenly rushed out of the hallway and made a phone call. She couldn't believe her grandfather was that fast. She never saw him run. She couldn't hear what he was saying. She looked over at her grandma. She was trembling. Strange. Why would you react like that? Grandfather, he came back, barging into the room and spoke to the grandmother. I've got to go out for a while, he said. You stay here with the child. Don't take your eyes off her for a second. What's going on, Grandpa? She cried. This was really worrying, and just remember, she's 8 years old, a girl. She hasn't seen much of the world, and this change of emotions is very weird. She never had that with her parents. They were always so gentle. Now, her grandfather looked at her with a sad expression in his eyes, and he said, You've been liked by Hachishakusama. With that, he hurried out, got into his truck, and drove off. What was that? She turned to her grandmother and cautiously asked, Who's Hachima? Well, you know, the one that you said, Hachishakusama, her grandmother said. Don't worry, she replied in a shaky voice. Grandpa, he will do something. No need for you to worry. Trust us. And as we sat nervously in the kitchen, waiting for my grandfather to come back, she explained what was happening. She told me, and everyone else who was listening, that it was a dangerous thing that was haunting the area. They called it Hachishakusama. Why? It's because of its height. In Japanese, Hachishakusama means 8 feet tall. When I first heard this story, I found it very puzzling. It sounded like the female version of Slenderman. So the story goes on. And the grandmother explains what the tale is all about. So, the 8 feet tall woman is some kind of force that takes on the appearance of an extremely tall woman. Makes a sound like bo, bo, bo in a deep male voice. It doesn't always look the same. It's slightly different every time, depending on who sees it. Some say it looks like a haggard old woman in a kimono. Others say it's a girl in a white funeral shroud. But one thing they do have in common. That's its height and the sound it makes. A long time ago, it was captured by monks. They managed to confine it in a ruined building on the outskirts of the village. They managed to trap it using 4 small religious statues called Chizos. They placed it at north, south, east and west of the ruins. And this would prevent it from being able to move from there. But somehow it managed to escape. The last time it appeared was about 15 years ago, her grandmother said. And anyone who saw the 8-feet-tall woman was destined to die within a few days. It all sounded so strange, crazy even, when she wasn't sure what to believe. That's just a folk tale, just a bad dream of a fairy tale. Who would believe that? Kids tell these stories to each other, not grown-ups. And when grandfather came back, there was an old woman with him. She introduced herself as Keisan. She handed the girl a small crumpled piece of card and saying, "Here, take this and hold it." And then she and grandfather, they went upstairs to do something. The girl was left in the kitchen with her grandmother again. The girl really needed to go to the toilet. Her grandmother followed her to the bathroom and wouldn't let her shut the door. That really freaked her out. After a while, grandfather and Keisan took her upstairs and brought her into her bedroom. All the windows, they were covered in newspapers, and lots of ancient runes had been written on them. There were small bowls of salt in all 4 corners of the room. A small Buddha figure placed at the center of the room on top of a wooden box. There was also a bright blue bucket. "What's the bucket for?" the girl asked. It seemed out of place. "That's for you, when you need to use the restroom," grandfather replied. "You cannot leave." Keisan sat me down on the bed and said, "Soon the sun will be setting, so listen carefully. You have to stay in this room until tomorrow morning. Don't come out under any circumstances until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your grandmother and your father will not speak to you or call you until then. Just remember, do not leave the room for any reason until then." She would let her parents know what was going on. The old hag spoke in such a grave tone that all the girl could do was quietly nod her head. Tears were filling her eyes. This was the worst trip ever. Like a nightmare she really wanted to wake up from. "You have to follow Keisan's instructions to the letter," Grandpa told her. "Never let go of the parchment she gave you. And if anything happens, pray to Buddha. Make sure you lock this door when we leave." They walked out into the hallway, and after saying goodbye to them, she and the girl closed the bedroom and locked it. She turned on the TV, tried to watch something, but she was too nervous. She felt sick to her stomach. It was all unsettling. Grandma had left some snacks and rice balls for her, but she couldn't eat them. It was all suffocating her. It was like in prison. She was feeling depressed, scared. It was so quiet in the room that it was scaring her. Eventually she just lay down on the bed and just waited. And before she knew it, she was asleep. And when she woke up, it was just after 1 a.m. And then she realized something was tapping on the window. Tap, 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 tap. She felt the blood draining from her face, and her heart skipped a beat. She desperately tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just the wind playing tricks. Maybe the branches of a tree, although she did not think there was a tree in front of the house. It was more on the side. She turned up the volume on the TV so she wouldn't hear the tapping noise, and eventually it stopped. That's when she heard grandfather calling her. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. "If you're scared, you don't have to stay in there all alone. I can come in, keep you company." She felt good, and she even started to smile, and she rushed over to open the door. But something made her stop. She got goosebumps all over her body. It wasn't right. It didn't feel right. It sounded like grandfather, but somehow it was not. She couldn't tell what it was. She just knew. "What are you doing?" grandfather asked her. "You can open the door now." She glanced to her left, and a chill went down her spine. It's weird. She was looking in the bowls. The salt was turning black. Pitch black. Almost like the night was filling the bowls. And the girl backed away from the door, her whole body trembling with fear. She fell to her knees in front of the Buddha statue. She would clutch the piece of parchment tightly in her hand and started desperately praying for help. "Please, Buddha, please, please save me from Hachishakusama," she wailed. Then she heard a voice outside the door saying, "Po, po, po." The tapping on the window started up again. She was overcome by fear, and she crouched there in front of the statue, half crying, half praying for the rest of the night. She felt like it would never end, but eventually it was morning. The salt in all 4 bowls was pitch black. She checked her watch. 7:30 a.m. was time. She cautiously opened the door. Grandma and Kei-san, they were standing outside waiting for her. And when my grandfather saw my face, she started crying. "I'm so glad you're still alive," she said. The girl went downstairs, was surprised to see her father and mother sitting in the kitchen. Grandfather came in. He said, "Hurry up, you've got to get going." We all went to the front door. There was a large black van waiting in the driveway. Several men from the village were standing around it, pointing at me, whispering, "That's the girl." The van was a 9-seater. They put me in the middle, surrounded by 8 men. Kei-san was in the driver's seat. The man on her left, he looked down at her and said, "You've got yourself in quite a spot of trouble. I know you're probably worried. Just keep your head down, your eyes shut." None of them could see it. That's what he told her. But she could see it. So she had to keep her eyes closed until she was safe out of there. Grandfather, he drove in front, and her dad's car was following behind. When everyone was ready, the little convoy started moving fairly slowly, just about 20 kilometers an hour, maybe even less. After a while, Kei-san said, "This is where it gets hard," and she started muttering a prayer under her breath. That was when I heard her voice again. "Po, po, 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 po." She clutched the parchment Kei-san had given her tightly in her hand. keeping her head down. But she peeked outside. She saw a white dress fluttering in the breeze. It was moving along with the van. It was Hachishakusama. She was just outside the window, keeping pace with us. Then suddenly she went down, peered into the van. "No," I gasped. "Close your eyes," the man beside her shouted. The girl immediately shut her eyes as hard as she could. It was painful, but she kept them as hard as she could close them. She kept them shut. She tightened her grip on the piece of parchment. Then the tapping began. The voice became louder. "Bo, bo, bo, bo." Tapping was on all windows, on all the walls. All the men in the van were startled and on edge, muttering nervously to themselves. None of them could see 8 feet tall. They couldn't hear her voice, but they could hear tapping on the windows and on the walls of the van. Kei-san started praying louder and louder until she was almost shouting. Tension inside the van was unbearable at the time. Tapping stopped. The voice disappeared. Kei-san, she looked back at us. I said, "Think we're safe now." And all the men around her breathed a sigh of relief. The van pulled over to the side of the road. Men got out. They transferred the girl into the dad's car. Her mother held her close, and tears were running down the girl's cheeks. Just imagine all of this commotion. It would scare everyone. Grandfather and her father bowed to the men, and they all went their way. Kei-san, came to the window, and she asked me to show her the piece of parchment she had given me. When the girl opened her hand, she saw the parchment had gone completely black. Kei-san said, "I think you'll be okay now. Just to be sure, hold on to this for a while." And she gave her a new piece of parchment. After that, all of them drove straight to the airport. Grandfather saw them all safely on the plane, and when they took off, her parents sighed. They were relieved. Father told me he had heard about Davy told before. Years ago, his friend had been liked by her. The boy disappeared. Never seen again. Her father said there were other people who had been liked by her and lived to tell about it. They all had to leave Japan, settle down in foreign countries. They were never able to go back to their homeland. She always uses children as the victims. They say it's because children are dependent on their parents and family members. Makes them easier to deceive when she poses as their relatives. They said the men in the van were all blood relatives of her, and they all had sitting around her. And while her father and grandfather had been driving in front and back, it was done to try and confuse Hachishakusama. All family members, who was the right person? It seemed logical. Father said it took a while to contact everyone and get them together, so that's why she had to be confined in the room all night. The father told her that one of the little Yuzu statues, the ones that were meant to keep her trapped, had been broken. That's how she escaped. It gave her the chills. She was glad when she finally got home. Now, this story that happened about 10 years ago or more. In the meantime, the girl hadn't seen her grandparents anymore. She didn't even go to the country even. She did call them every few weeks, talk to them on the phone. And as years passed, a grown woman now, she tried to convince herself that that was just an urban legend, a folk tale, a story to scare children off. Everything that happened was just some elaborate prank. But sometimes she wasn't sure. Her grandfather, he had died 2 years ago. He was sick. He wouldn't allow her to visit him. He left strict instructions in his will that she wasn't to attend his funeral. It was sad, really. She wanted to say goodbye to him. She misses that. She missed him. Her grandmother called a few days ago. She said she had been diagnosed with cancer. She missed her terribly. She wanted to see her grandchild one last time before she would die. The one said, "Are you sure, Grandma? I mean, is it safe?" It's been 10 years, she said. You're no longer a kid. It happened a long time ago. It's forgotten. You're grown up. Sure, there's no problem anymore. It seemed logical. The 8-feet-tall woman only looks for children. She's no child anymore. But still, what about Hachishakusama? Is everything okay? Would she do something? Would she not? For a moment, there was a silence on the other end of the phone. Then, a deep, masculine voice. Po, 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 po. This is what the legend is about. Now, in Resident Evil, the village, we have a person that is very similar. This time the name is Lady Dimitrescu. Is she Hachishakusama reincarnate? Or somebody else? What do you think?